This episode was brought to you by Rock & Sons Tire and Auto at the east end of Adams Avenue. Welcome to EOTalks, Eastern Oregon's very own talk show, only here on EO Alive.
Hey Eastern Oregon, thanks for joining us today. This is another EOTalks, and I'm privileged to have Joe Petrusek with me today. And Joe has been a longtime physician here in the Grand Ronde Valley. So, hey, thanks a bunch, Joe, for jumping in with me today on this EOTalk.
Good to be here.
Yeah.
All right.
So,
all right.
how long?
Well, I came in
start
75, so I was in practice for 46 years.
Wow.
And retired about 2 years and 3 months ago. So
Yeah, you have it down.
I have it down. Yeah.
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 So, a lot of people know you. So how many years was that here in this area?
Well, I guess 75. Okay.
Yeah, put you on the spot.
I haven't thought through this lately.
Yeah.
I was here 46, pushing 50. What came 75? So okay, 48 years.
48 years.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So, and you were an ear, nose, and throat. What's the term for that?
Okay, the long term is otolaryngologist,
Okay.
or sometimes known as otorhinolaryngologist.
Okay.
But ENT is what everybody calls us because it's just so much easier to remember than that stands for ear, nose, throat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and we kind of know why it's a lot
Yeah.
easier than the longer version. Yeah. And so let's go back. Tell me where you were born and how you got to LeGrand.
I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I was raised there, went to high school there, went to university there, and went to medical school there. And so I never got out of the county until I became a resident, back then we had what were called interns. Now they've called it R1s, resident ones. And I went to Seattle. Looked around. I liked coming out west. I liked Seattle. And so I got a position there at a hospital called Swedish Hospital, and then became a resident at University of Washington.
Okay.
I became interested in ENT when I was in medical school. Actually, at first I thought I was going to be OBGYN. And back then, the Salvation Army had hospitals for young ladies who got pregnant. They were called Booth Memorial Hospital. And I got interested in it and delivered my first baby, I think, at 67.
Wow.
So that's a long time ago.
Yeah.
And then I ended up living at this hospital. And a kind of a cute story here. I got the job. I was single. And suddenly the people running it realized that there's a single guy living in a building with like about 70 pregnant females. And they didn't think it looked very good.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I was engaged at that time. So we moved up the wedding so that we could live there, and it looked good to the Salvation Army. So I used to kid everybody that my wife was the only person in that building who was not pregnant but had to get married. So anyway, one of my best friends, actually, at the time, we became roommates, and he married a woman who worked for an ENT, and she regaled me with stories all the time about the interesting days he had and the kinds of interesting problems that he encountered, and it piqued my interest, and so I decided someplace along the line that maybe I wanted to do that instead. So I came out to Seattle and then applied at the University of Washington and got into the program there.
Wow.
So that's how that happened.
So and so somewhere along the line, did the aspect of snot, ear, nose, and fluids? I don't know did that.
I think there was actually a few things. One is that you could have both a business, a busy office practice and a surgical practice.
Okay.
So you could do both. We had both sexes, all ages, and the anatomy from here up is pretty complicated.
Right.
And very interesting, I thought. And
Yeah.
so it all kind of came together as to something that I might want to really learn about and treat diseases of that area.
Wow. So once you received your basic MD, what does it take? How long did it take you to get the ENT part of that?
4 years of MD, of course, and then there was a year of internship and 4 years of residency, so 5 more years after medical school. So it was 9 years of training. Yeah.
So after your bachelor's,
Yeah.
it's 9 more years of
Yeah.
training before you like. Okay, so then how did you get to LeGrand?
Okay, so we're out west now, and I really like it out here, and I didn't really want to go back to Wisconsin. Wisconsin's a beautiful place, and there's lots going on there, and of course my family and friends were there, so there was a kind of a drawback there. But I hated the humidity, and I hated the mosquitoes, and I hated the really cold winters. And the winters where I grew up are much colder than right here in LeGrand.
Yeah.
So we started looking out west, and I found cast the net out and started looking around, and I heard that LeGrand at that time had an ENT man who was considering retiring, and they were recruiting young physicians at that time. And there was a member of the board, General Baum, who actually, as a board member, he interviewed all the doctors himself. It was kind of interesting. But I'd heard about it. I came out and looked at it. We loved the place, and next thing we knew, we were here. And at that time, there was just a handful of specialists. There was a urologist and an orthopedic surgeon, and I think that was it as far as specialists go. And when I came, I came a year with, we got a pediatrician and an OBGYN.
Wow.
And then it had been building ever since.
Wow. And so what year was that you...
That was 75 that I came.
75. So where was the hospital in its building phase at that time?
Oh, it didn't look at all like it did now. It was.
But they were up on the hill.
They were up on the hill.
Okay.
We have what I call the old OR, which was, I'm having a hard time remembering what it was like. It was pretty basic. I'd probably been built at least 15 or 20 years earlier than that. And so the new OR, that I call the new OR, which is now the old OR, because we're getting a new one,
right.
was, well, I guess it was in service for 50 years.
Wow.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm probably off a little bit on the dates, but something like that, yeah.
So, I don't know, what was that like, starting, so you were a new doc in a new town.
Brand new.
Yeah.
People welcomed all of us new people with open arms. That was great. That part was great. I was on my own for the first time in my life, private practice. Back then, everybody was in private practice.
Right.
And for years, I was the only one here doing what I did, because the fellow who was here retired. He went right to office. He never went back to the hospital, and within a few years, he decided to retire completely. So I was all by myself.
Wow.
And it was interesting because, when you're going through school and you're going through your residency, you're constantly bantering back and forth with people and learning from each other, and so it was a unique learning experience for me.
Now, part of what you did, at least when you retired, was you were also doing allergy type treatments and stuff. How did you how did you evolve in, or was that part of from the beginning?
That is part of training in many ENT programs. It wasn't part of mine, but allergies are such an important underlying issue in ear, nose, and throat. And when I got here, there was nobody really doing allergy. There were a couple of people doing a little bit of it, but not much. And it became quite apparent to me that it was something that maybe I had to learn. And by the way, when I was in medical school, I did have an interest in allergy, and I took a kind of a mini internship, a fellowship, as a medical student in allergy. So I had a little bit of a background in it, and then it just was a natural segue into doing this. And so I started taking courses and learning how to do it, and eventually we got it down and we started doing it.
Wow.
And I think that was 79. I was here in 75. 79, I think, is when we started. So I wasn't here very long before we got into doing that.
Yeah. And this community, farming, all of that, I mean, that I would imagine that was a big assistance for your patients.
It actually became a big part of the practice. Yeah.
So Well, so let's talk about your family.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you had kids.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I'm going to
yeah.
talk about when, when they came in this journey of when you.
Well, I arrived with two of them. One was 4 when we got here, and one was born in January 75. So he was an infant when we got here.
Okay.
And then 2 more were born after that. So the first one was born in 70, and the last one was born in 84. So we kind of spread them out a little bit. Of course, so everybody went to school here.
Right.
Even the 2 non-natives, they might as well have been natives because they grew up here. And it was a good experience. I mean, we thought the school was good. They got a good education, and all went on to 4-year institutions of higher learning, and they're all professionals of some sort now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what was in this day and age when there's a lot of temporary things, temporary careers, or there's a lot of moving around.
That wasn't the
No,
way it was back then.
What filtered into the thing of you like, okay, we're here and we're going to be here for.
Pretty much everybody I know from my era who went someplace stayed there. And that's just the way it was. You found a community that you thought you would like, and in general, you were right about it, and you stayed there. This new paradigm of people moving back and forth, it probably started 20, maybe it's even longer, but that wasn't the case then. I came here intending to stay, liked it, and I stayed.
You just carved out a life and a practice and made it happen. So somewhere in there, the hospital started hiring physicians.
Actually, that started actually a year or 2 before I got there. They started to recruit. They wanted to turn this into a medical center.
Okay.
It was like any other small community at the time. A lot of what they call general practitioners, people who could do pretty much a little of everything. But everybody who was in medicine could see that this was coming. That we need information was becoming voluminous, and it wasn't possible to really do that anymore. And so one of the first doctors they got here was an orthopedic surgeon, and he was so busy, it was just amazing. Well, we were all busy when we first got here.
Yeah.
And so little by little they built up a regional medical center over a period of time.
And so talk about the advantages or disadvantages from a hospital standpoint of having docs in private practice versus having them as employees.
Well, at that point, there were little, if no, employees. It just that wasn't the model.
Right.
Doctors had always been on their own and signed some sort of a contract with the hospital and got on the staff, and it was the medical part of it was run by the doctors. Little by little, it became important for the hospital to take over more and more and more of that. And then when the parameters, Medicare started in '66. I think they passed the bill in '65. So that wasn't that long before I got here.
Right.
And that started changing everything, the method of payment and that sort of thing. And it became, and they started making rules and regulations that never had before. And it was almost impossible for a single person to keep up with that sort of thing. And so you needed some kind of a structure, at least the way I look at it, you needed some kind of a structure for that to really work. And so that's I think how that developed all over the country.
Yeah. So, and was part of that, I don't know, maybe in the mid 80s and 90s, do you think the mentality of physicians coming in, they were a little bit more shopping and looking for a better place to go, and maybe LeGrand was kind of a stepping stone. Was it partially to stabilize that culture too, or I don't know, what are your thoughts?
I'm not sure it really, I don't know, because I think when you come in as a hired hand, it's probably easier to stay 3 years and then leave than it is if you come in to establish a practice and then put your heart and soul into that practice.
Right.
And then if you need to leave or want to leave, then you're going to have to sell that practice, which you don't do anymore. That's not a model that's used anymore. But back then, when you committed yourself, you pretty much committed yourself because it was a lot, in a way, easier to stay.
Right.
you'd have to be pretty unhappy, I think, to leave at that point. And their whole mindset going into it was different. And now I think a lot of the docs and nurse practitioners, they want to practice medicine. They want to practice medicine in a good institution. They want to practice really good medicine. But to me, it seems that they're not as interested in actually becoming as much a part of the community as we were back in those days.
Well, and part of that is just a culture change a little bit.
It's a culture change.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a culture shift. But just to kind of drill down so that I make sure I understand this. So when Medicare came in, and the reason that matters is because then docs are paid. They're paid by Medicare.
Right.
And they're not and docs are not necessarily paid what they're charging. They're paying a negotiated rate of some kind, right? Okay.
Right.
And even to get that negotiated rate takes a lot of paperwork and a lot of stuff. Okay.
Yeah, it takes a lot of office work to get that done.
And so then that made, so if you have a doc who's starting, and particularly now in this day and age, which is infinitely more complicated than I'm sure it was then if all they want to do is, well, I mean, not all they want to do, but their primary thing is that they want to do medicine.
Right.
They don't want to do a bunch of paperwork.
And that's actually a good model. I mean, you don't have to worry about the business aspect of it.
Right.
You don't have to worry about employees and people coming and going and that sort of thing. That's left up to the administration.
Right.
So it's there's of course there's a loss of autonomy.
Yeah.
And that really bothered many people in the transition phase. But I don't really know if that's bothering people now or not, because it's the model the way it is.
Right. But do you think, I mean, I kind of look at it as though that there might have been some instability in that time. I mean, was it hard to attract docs was it hard to attract independent docs? Maybe put it that way.
I think, it happened slowly over a period of time.
Yeah.
I don't really remember there being lots of problems that way. I think, this is a nice community to live in.
Right.
And so I think as the transition occurred, it seems like it's harder now. I know they're constantly recruiting up there for everything. Everybody's recruiting for everything.
Right, yeah.
But I'm not sure I would say there was any instability. I think little by little, the community of providers grew and was able to really handle what the population needed here. I hear now that they are short of up there, and they're constantly recruiting, but they seem to be somehow getting by.
Yeah. Well, and I think that the bottom line is it just made more business sense for a physician to not have to deal with all the
absolutely,
paperwork.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were going to go into the kind of practice that I had now, I think the amount of paperwork and regulations and the environment would be so difficult, it's just impossible to do it. I know there are some big groups, like back where my son practices in the Midwest, there's big groups, just ear, nose, and throat doctors or just orthopedic surgeons. And I think some of that goes on out in the big cities out here too. But they're big enough, there's enough of them that they can actually form a group and hire the kind of administration that they need to run that sort of thing.
Right. So now the question is then, why did you stay independent all that? I mean, so because 2 years ago, I mean, you hung out to the very last.
I did.
Right?
I was one of the last. I don't know. I liked doing what I was doing it the way I was doing it, having the independence, and I've always been a real supporter of the hospital, and wanted to do anything possible to support it and be part of it. But I don't know. I was comfortable doing what I was doing,
right?
And because the rules and regulations occurred year by year, we could grow into it.
Yeah.
And so we were able to handle that sort of thing.
So did you, and I'm going along a little bit of back information, and that is that you probably would have retired earlier than what you did.
Yes, I would.
I don't know. But I'm going to talk about that transition and what finally what finally triggered it to where it's like, okay, I feel comfortable?
Oh, well, actually, we just needed to get people here, good ENT docs here who wanted to come here and stay here. And then I felt comfortable actually quitting and turning my practice over. And that's what happened. We've got two very fine ENT people here now who were able to step in and take over. And when the second guy came, I wasn't needed anymore. So off I went.
No, and that is what I had heard. I had heard that you would have retired earlier, but at the end of the day, you felt like that if you left, your patients wouldn't be served
right.
as
See,
well without you.
I was
Yes.
doing the allergy when the first ENT came.
Yeah.
He was not an allergist, and he got so busy so quickly that he never got interested in trying to do the allergy.
Yeah.
So we needed to wait for another one to come who did know allergy and could handle that part of the practice too. So at least that's the way I looked at it.
Yeah. And so, but still, I mean, the bottom line is you delayed your retirement because you wanted to make sure your patients
I
were
wanted to be sure it was covered, yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a bit. So at the end of the day, I mean, you must have really enjoyed.
Oh, I did.
Yeah.
It wasn't onerous to stay in. I mean, I really enjoyed doing it. And besides, when the first Dr. Funk came, he was wonderful about covering for me. So I was able to get away more then than I'd ever been able to get away before.
Yeah.
And that was really important to me at that stage of my life.
Yeah. So, was there some enjoyment in being able to do something that immediately helped patients? I mean, was that, because sometimes when you I know this from talking to so many docs, that you're helping them, but it might not be a direct result. And was there something about what you did that you really appreciated? Somebody had an allergy, or somebody had an issue?
When you get those times when you can see very rapid relief of symptoms, like stopping a nosebleed.
Yeah.
For instance, it's just, I mean, people are miserable with nosebleeds.
Right.
But people who have, when the kids had fluid in their ear, were deaf. They would walk out of the come out of the operating room hearing.
Yeah.
Just like that.
Wow.
And there's certain operations we do where we restore hearing immediately.
Yeah.
And that was very gratifying.
And you'd go home at the end of the day and like, that was a good day. I made a difference in someone's life. Yeah. Well, so let's talk about nosebleeds for a minute. And I know this. You and I are in Rotary together, and I remember you coming. Seeing you at Rotary. Like, how's it going, Joe? And you said, well, I got a nosebleed the other. Talk about that a little bit, because that's kind of interesting.
Of course, I've been treating nosebleeds all my life, and I had never had a nosebleed, and I don't even know to this day exactly why that vessel up in my nose broke loose. But it was the end of the day, everybody was gone, and I was bending over to do something, and all of a sudden the stream of blood started coming out of me, and I thought, oh, I can just stop this. This is not going to be a big thing. So I went around and I stuffed some gauze up my nose, and we have actual packs, and I just grinned and bore it. It just I can do this. Well, it just kept coming, and so it was like I said, it was the end of the day. There was nobody there, and I was bleeding pretty heavily. But I didn't want to go and get in my car and drive over to the hospital, so I walked over to the hospital, so I wouldn't make a mess in my car. And there's blood on the sidewalk and blood in the back door of the hospital, and blood down the hall, and I'm trying to stop it, but fortunately made it to the ER and they fixed me up good.
Well, so how do you? And you had told me that sometimes people, I remember us talking about that. Sometimes people have such severe nosebleeds that you have to plug them from the inside and not from the out. Talk about that.
From the back. Well, yeah, it's called a posterior bleed.
Okay.
And now there's with newer techniques. Oftentimes the doc can get back to with a little scope, but sometimes we would have to take a great big gauze pack or actually use lamb's wool and put antibiotic dressing in it, and then would put it in would put a tube into their nose, down their throat, tie this to it, and then bring it back up and plug it from the back, and then plug it from the front.
Wow.
If we couldn't get to it. And
So the string would come out the nose, the gauze pack would be out their mouth.
Yeah,
right?
and then you pull it up.
And then
Yeah.
you pull it and bill it.
It was pretty barbaric, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody has to do that anymore.
Wow. Well, so you probably have some interesting stories. I mean, can you think of any humorous things that have happened, as you've, or maybe, did you ever have to, you guys live out towards Somerville.
Right.
Yeah, did you ever have to do any veterinary work that you never?
Actually, I did do some veterinary work for my next door neighbor. The parents were gone, and I guess the kids decided they wanted to castrate the pigs. So there was a knock at the door, and one of the pigs had a hernia, and when they castrated the pig, all the intestines came out.
Oh my.
So I went and got my fishing line and a big needle and went and repaired the hernia in the barn. And what's so funny about it, animals being animals, that little piggy, I finished, we were holding them down, of course we didn't have anesthesia. That little piggy stood up and walked over and started eating.
Wow.
So that was pretty funny. That was years and years and years ago.
Wow. Anything else that you can think of that was? So talk about the OR a little bit and kind of the uniqueness of it, and because people have kind of a mystery about.
The OR was always a great place to work. It's kind of a tight-knit group. We have just a handful of anesthesiologists, and the nurses are the same people all the time, so you get to know each other and you develop a real camaraderie.
Yeah.
And you would show up in the morning and the crew would be there, and it would kind of vary depending on who needed to go where, but you got to know and work with everybody because there weren't that many of them. And we would start to go, usually have a heavy schedule and have 3 or 4 or 5 surgeries in a row, and just kind of do what you need to do and work on the next one and work on the next one, and to make sure everything's just great before you start and before you finish and after you finish, and that the patient's just doing super well in the recovery room, or maybe even out of the recovery room by then before you start the next one, because you're responsible for everybody's health. And it's always between the surgeon and the anesthesiologist. The anesthesiologist is extremely important, and fortunately we've always been blessed with good ones here.
Yeah. So, give me an idea of the kind of surgeries that you might do in a day. Were they all the same, or were there was a variety?
There were tonsil days, and there were ear tube days.
Okay.
But a good deal of the time we would do various things, like I'd put a new eardrum in somebody, and then clean out another person's sinuses and take care of their sinus disease, and then I might have somebody who needed to have their tonsils out at that same day. Oftentimes, a day would be a surgical day. So, let's say it was a Tuesday. I wasn't in the office officially at all. If there was an emergency in between something, I might have to run over to do that. But I wasn't booked on Tuesdays. I was in the operating room, and then there was usually another day or two that was also at least fully or partially booked back in those days. Yeah.
So, talk to me about how technology changed over the course of 50 years. Yeah.
Well, the little endoscopy that is standard now was not around when I first trained, and it was a brand new thing, probably in the late 70s, early 80s, and of course I wasn't trained in it. But it looked to me at the time that was going to be the way to go. So there's continuing education all of the time. I mean, every year you go off to courses, and a lot of it's hands-on courses. So you work in a lab, and you get to do what you need to do in a laboratory setting. And then we would start to do it here. Then we would get another ENT doctor to come over who had been doing that sort of thing. To be with you and do it the first several times to make sure that everything was just the way it should be. Yeah. I mean, that's the way we learned back in those days.
So before that, you really couldn't see in.
No, and I tell you, watching ear, nose, and throat surgery was so boring because all you could see was a guy huddled over a little nostril, doing something like this, and nobody in the room could see what he's doing. Nowadays, it's all up on a screen.
Right.
You can see what's going on.
But could you see? I mean, or could you only see as much as you could see down the nostril?
See what you could see down the nostril, yeah.
Wow.
Had a little headlight on, and you come, well, at the time, very adept at that. Looking down a little hole and doing what you needed to do.
Right.
But it certainly isn't anything like the standard now when you've got a wide field and you can see what you're doing. The different lenses that show you where, not just where you are at, but the side views and that sort of thing. Plus they now use scans in there. You can look up at a screen and see where you are on the screen. You can see the patient and the metal tube up inside and the instruments and all that.
So you can actually see where you are
and
in
everybody
their
can
system.
see.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Do you remember the very first time where you saw that technology? And I mean, like it was the first time you ever saw inside of, the real inside of what?
Yeah. Well, the first time was actually not here. It was when I was taking courses.
Yeah.
And so it was. I remember going. Well, several times actually before we ever attempted it here. I remember going to various cities, Seattle a lot, Portland some, San Francisco some. I remember going to Memphis once, Los Angeles. Yeah, went around and because those places were always way ahead of us because
Right.
they were the centers, so those docs were the first to get these techniques, develop these techniques, and then the rest of us learned at that point.
So the nasal cavity, are you able to see up in the cavity itself now with instruments?
Yeah, well, I can actually see just with a headlight. I mean,
Oh, really?
Because I'm
Okay.
used to it. Okay.
Right.
And not everybody's, but many people, and especially if you use what's called a decongestant to shrink that tissue down.
Okay.
And if there's no major deformity, you can see we can see all the way back in some people, all the way to the back, without tools. But with lenses, you can see everybody, and you can see up into little nooks and crannies, and up into where the sinuses drain into the nose, and all that sort of thing.
So I mean, it kind of reminds me a little bit of like looking inside of a lung, and I mean, maybe it's not quite that spread out, but I mean, where you have so many different branches or different, and how interesting that would be.
Yeah, when you're looking at, actually that was part of my practice early on was bronchoscopy, because I had to go down into the lungs and take foreign objects out.
Okay.
Things like peanuts and pins and pennies.
Went down the wrong tube.
Went down the wrong tube, and that was an ear, nose, and throat thing, even though it was in the lungs. And so I had to learn to do that. And the thing about going into a lung is you can tell where you are when you start, and if you kind of memorize where you had to go right or left, and then you had to go that way or that way, and you could tell that from the X-ray, so you knew which way you had to go. But once you get in there, it all looks pretty much the same. So you know where you are partially just from having looked at beforehand, and then you get where you need to go. You find out what you need to get, and you grab it with a. There's some really interesting tools that work on a cable type thing, and you grab it and pull it back out.
Wow.
And in the old days, before we had fiber optics and rigid tubes, you could go down far enough to get most of that with a little metal tube, and you would stick it right down into there.
But it was rigid.
It was rigid.
Yeah. And so got it. So you'd kind of have to push the tissue to form. I mean, you'd have to guide it down.
You have to guide it down.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And again, you have to know your anatomy so
Right.
that you don't push things further down as you're getting there.
Right. So where do you think? I mean, where is ENT technology going?
Oh.
I mean, where do you see it going from where it's at right now?
I see. Well, first of all, there's subspecialty after subspecialty now.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of ear, nose, and throat doctors are not generally ENT like I was, or like we have here. They do just sinus surgery, or they're just ear surgery.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
There are some some cancer surgeons that do some really amazing, open up the entire face to get into a tumor way in the back, and then put it all back together. And then they've started using, oh, this was years ago, techniques where they would take parts of your thigh or your arm and rebuild tissue, grow it in place.
Wow.
To grow something back there. Yeah, none of that was going on when I first came out.
So then to kind of interpret that, the tools have kind of advanced to where they are now, but now it's a matter of some of getting the patient to be able to heal in a way that they've never been able to.
Yes. Yeah. The techniques have continued to be refined and improved with time.
Yeah. Well, let's pivot for just a minute. Tell me about your kids and where they are and what they're doing.
Okay, my oldest is a daughter. She's up in the Post Falls area of Idaho, and she is a speech pathologist, specializing pretty much in head injury, strokes, trauma. She had severe head trauma when she was in college, and became interested in it in her recovery time. The next three are boys. The oldest is a financial planner who lives in Spokane. He's also up in the same general area. The third one is a theologian, and he's been in Southern California at Loyola Marymount, but he just took a job with a Catholic bishop in, of all places, Minnesota. So he's moving from the nice warm weather to Minnesota. And then the youngest is ear, nose, and throat, and he's in the Chicago area.
Okay, awesome. And tell me about your wife.
Oh, Kathy, she graduated from nursing school as an RN in '67, and she went to work for doctors in Seattle. When I came here, she came to work for me, and she actually became the office manager because she's very, very good at that. So she continued to work as an RN. In fact, she's just now giving up her license.
Oh.
So she's had a license since 1967.
Wow.
To practice nursing, and she pretty much practiced nursing the whole time.
Wow.
And she's very good at it and loves it, and actually had some mixed feelings about retiring because she liked it so much.
So when you wound up your practice, then you wound up.
We retired the same day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that was a real transition. I mean, how's the retirement transition gone for you?
You know, we're still transitioning. It's going okay. There were so many loose ends. We live out in the country, and there's lots of maintenance that was kind of deferred.
Yeah.
I spent part of last summer rebuilding fence. We're just having fun, just being property owners and taking care of the place, and of course the kids are all grown and gone, so we're kind of rattling around in this house we raised the family in. But people come home and fill it up on holidays and that sort of thing, and we'd have no intention of downsizing yet.
Wow. Well, Joe, thank you so much for stopping by, and I'm Dr. Petrusek. I think most people call you Joe.
They do, yeah.
And it was I appreciate. I'm glad I had this opportunity a little bit to have you talk and to honor you for the number of years that you contributed and spent here in the Grand Ronde Valley. I know that people speak very highly of you, and as a physician and as a person and a friend. And so I just want to say thanks.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, it's people generally, I think that they have a misperception of physicians a little bit. They don't know them. It's like, well, yeah, but they're just doing it for the money, or they're just, and they don't understand quite the value of someone who picks a community and stays in it, especially in this transitional day and age. It's made a difference. It really has, and I want to say thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
So.
Okay.
Appreciate you being here.
Okay, Brent.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Eastern Oregon, for tuning in. appreciate you being here, and be sure and watch for the next EO Talks right here on EO Live.